Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're jumping into a topic you sent over, electrochemistry. Specifically, we're looking at the thermodynamics behind how chemical energy gets converted into electrical energy.
That's right. And our mission today is pretty straightforward. We want to take these foundational principles and just boil them down.
Get to the core insight,
Exactly. We want to show you the direct quantitative link between the chemical driving force, that's the Gibbs free energy, delta G, and the electrical driving force.
which we call the electromotive force, or EMF.
Right, or just var epsilon dollar. Understanding this link is, it's the key to how batteries work, how corrosion happens, everything.
Okay, so let's unpack that. At its most basic level, electrochemistry is all about moving electrons around. An electron transfer happens, and that causes an energy change.
And a change in the valence state of the atoms involved. But here's a crucial point that's easy to miss. The way we assign that valence, that oxidation state, it's really just a convention. It doesn't matter what the actual bond type is.
What do you mean?
Well, take something like hydrofluoric acid. The bond is maybe 50% ionic, 50% covalent. But for the thermodynamic bookkeeping, we just call it text plus 1 and text F1. It simplifies things so we can track the energy of moving that charge.
Got it. It's a model. So to make a reaction electrochemical, we need to set it up in a very specific way. You need what's called a conceptual cell.
Yes. For a generic reaction, say text plus text BO goes to text BO, you can't just mix them together. You need two connections to complete the circuit.
Right. So connection A would be what? A wire? An electron conductor?
Exactly. And this is the part everyone forgets. Connection B has to be an ionic conductor, an electrolyte.
Ah, the unsung hero. And that's to maintain charge balance, right?
Precisely. As electrons move through the external wire, ions have to move internally through the electrolyte. That keeps the whole system neutral. And when you set this up, the voltage you measure that just stops the reaction. That's the EMF. It perfectly balances the chemical driving force.
And this is where we get quantitative. I remember from thermo that the decrease in Gibbs free energy, DGEGR, is the absolute maximum non-expansion work you can get from a system. And in our case, that work is electrical. So the units line up perfectly. A joule is just a volt times a coulomb.
It's an elegant relationship. And to bridge the chemistry, which is in moles, to the electricity, which is in coulombs, we need one key constant.
Faraday's constant?
Faraday's constant. Math frac, it's 96,487 coulombs. That's the charge of one whole mole of electrons.
So with that, the whole thing just collapses into one beautiful equation.
Delta.
Delta G, delta versus energy. The change in Gibbs energy is just the negative of the EMF times the ion valence times Faraday's constant.
The chemical force is perfectly balanced by the electrical force.
Yeah.
It's the foundation of everything that follows.
So let's apply this. What's the classic example?
It has to be the Daniell cell, the original battery, really. You have a zinc electrode dipped into a zinc sulfate solution and a copper electrode in a copper sulfate solution. And they're separated by some kind of porous barrier. That's your ionic conductor.
What's so interesting to me is how that voltage even appears in the first place. I mean, at the interface between the metal and the liquid.
Yeah, you can't measure the absolute potential, but you can understand the charge separation that creates it. When the metal hits the electrolyte, ions and water molecules all rearrange themselves.
Until an equilibrium is established.
Right. And in this case, the zinc spontaneously wants to push electrons out, so the zinc electrode becomes negative. The copper, on the other hand, pulls electrons in, so it becomes positive.
And the EMF we measure, the var epsilon, is just the potential difference between those two terminals.
It is. And that measured voltage difference is directly related to the chemical potential difference of the electrons in the wires.
This brings up a really key point then.
Yeah.
Reversibility.
Yes.
So if you apply an external voltage that exactly matches the cell's EMF, what happens?
Almost nothing. An infinitesimally small current flows. The cell is running perfectly reversibly, and you're getting the maximum possible electrical work out of it.
And if you just nudge that external voltage up a tiny bit.
The whole reaction flips. It runs in reverse. You're no longer getting energy out. You're putting energy in. Your battery just became an electrolysis cell.
Okay, so that's the reversible limit. What's the other extreme? What if you just, connect the two ends with a wire and short circuit it?
Maximum irreversibility. The external voltage is 0, so you get 0 electrical work. All of that gives free energy, that chemical driving force.
It just turns into heat.
All of it, instantly. It's the exact same outcome as if you just dropped a piece of zinc metal directly into the copper sulfate solution. You get a hot, fast reaction, but no useful work.
Okay, so we've covered the ideal standard state, but in the real world, concentration matters. Activity matters.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the full form of the Nernst equation.
Right, because the EMF isn't constant.
No, it changes. For any reaction, the actual EMF is the standard EMF of var epsilon circ, minus a correction term. And that term is all about the ratio of the activities of your products to your reactants.
So back in the Daniell cell, the voltage actually depends on how concentrated the zinc sulfate is versus the copper sulfate.
It does, but that concentration difference creates a new real-world problem.
The liquid junction potential.
Yes, that's a tricky one. The different ions, zinc, copper, sulfate, they don't all move at the same speed through that porous barrier.
So you get a little bit of charge buildup at the junction because of differential mobility.
Exactly, and that creates a small parasitic voltage that messes up your measurement. That's why we often use a salt bridge in the lab to try and minimize it.
Okay, let's move from liquids to a really cool materials application.
Oh.
The concentration cell.
Mm-hmm.
These use identical electrodes, but the concentration of something in the environment is different on each side. The text highlights the oxygen concentration cell.
Oh, this is a brilliant piece of materials engineering. It uses a solid electrolyte, typically lime-stabilized zirconia, CaOZrO2.
So what's the trick here?
Well, zirconium is a +4 ion. You're doping it with calcium, which is a +2 ion. To maintain charge neutrality in the crystal lattice, the material has to create holes.
Vacancies.
Oxygen vacancies. And these vacancies allow oxide ions, O2-, to hop through the solid. Crucially, it's only the oxygen ions that can move.
So it's a perfect ionic conductor, but only for oxygen.
Exactly. And because of that, the EMF of the cell becomes a direct measurement of the ratio of the oxygen pressures at the two electrodes. The voltage you read is just proportional to the log of that pressure ratio.
That's incredibly powerful. You can just hook up a voltmeter and find out the equilibrium oxygen pressure over a metal oxide, or even the oxygen activity in molten steel.
All non-destructively. It's a fantastic sensor.
So we've seen how voltage depends on concentration. Let's circle back to pure thermodynamics. What happens if we measure that voltage as a function of temperature?
Now this is where the real magic happens. If you plot the measured EMF versus temperature, the graph tells you so much more than just delta G.
Okay, I'm thinking of the fundamental equations. The derivative of delta G with respect to temperature is negative entropy delta T.
You got it. So since delta G is just proportional to var epsilon, the slope of your var epsilon versus T plot must be proportional to the entropy change, delta sterile.
Wow. So you can get the entropy of the reaction just from the slope of a line.
Just from the slope. And once you have delta G from the voltage itself and delta zillis from the slope, you can immediately calculate the enthalpy change, delta H dollar, for the reaction.
So you need both the voltage value and its sensitivity to temperature to get the full thermodynamic picture.
That's right. And this leads to one of the most counterintuitive results in all of electrochemistry. It's about heat flow.
Go on.
If you're doing electrical work, the heat that flows in or out of the system, $, is not equal to the enthalpy change, delta H star.
Right. Okay, that's different.
Let's use the Daniell cell again. If you just short-circuit it, let it run spontaneously, a lot of heat rushes out. But if you run it reversibly, pulling out the maximum work, the heat exchanged is Q equals Q equals delta 6.
And for the Daniell cell at 25C, that value is positive 4,140 joules.
Positive. It means that to produce maximum electrical work, the battery actually has to absorb heat from its surroundings to keep going.
That's completely wild. It's cooling itself down to produce electricity efficiently.
It's a fundamentally different process than just burning the reactants for heat.
Okay, mind blown. Let's pivot to aqueous solutions, where so many practical things like corrosion happen.
Right, so the terminology shifts a little bit to molality and molarity, and we have to be careful with ions that dissociate using a mean ionic activity coefficient.
And there's a huge measurement problem in water. You can't measure the potential of one single electrode. You need a reference point, an anchor.
You do, and that anchor is the Standard Hydrogen Electrode, the SHE.
So that's the arbitrary 0 point for everything in aqueous electrochemistry.
It's defined as 0. It's just hydrogen gas at 1 atmosphere bubbling over a platinum foil in a solution with hydrogen ions at unit activity. Everything else is measured relative to that.
And by comparing every other half reaction to the SHE, we build up the entire electrochemical series, that big table of standard reduction potentials.
Which then lets you calculate the standard delta G for, say, forming table salt. You just look up the potential for sodium and the potential for chlorine, and the math gives you the answer.
This all comes together in one of the most useful tools for a materials scientist, the Faraday diagram.
The ultimate stability map. They're basically phase diagrams, but for electrochemistry. They plot electrode potential, bar epsilon, on the y-axis against pH on the
And
x-axis.
the very first thing you see on any Porbet diagram is the stability of water itself.
There are two lines, A and B, that define the region where liquid water is stable. If your potential and pH conditions put you below line A, water will break down and you'll generate hydrogen gas.
And if you go above line B,
You'll generate oxygen gas.
and the Porbet diagram for aluminum shows exactly why this is so critical. To make aluminum matter from aluminum ions, you need a very, very negative potential.
So negative, in fact, that you are far, far below that hydrogen evolution line, line A.
Meaning if you try to electroplate aluminum out of a water-based solution,
We'll just make hydrogen, a lot of hydrogen. The water will always react first.
and that single fact right there on that diagram is why we have to produce aluminum using incredibly high-temperature molten salt electrolysis instead of a simple aqueous bath. Chemistry dictates the entire multi-billion-dollar industry.
It really does. So to recap this whole deep dive, the central idea is the direct equivalence between chemical driving force, delta G, and the maximum electrical work you can get.
Quantified by delta G, var epsilon's mathifrac.
From there, the Nernst equation tells us how concentration changes the voltage. We saw how solid electrolytes in concentration cells can be used as amazing sensors. And maybe most profoundly, how measuring voltage versus temperature opens the door to finding the entropy and enthalpy of a reaction.
And these aren't just academic principles. They're at work every time you use a battery, every time a bridge corrodes. It's the foundation of our energy infrastructure. We talked about the aluminum Porbet diagram and how aluminum oxide, Al2O3, actually dissolves at high pH.
Right, it forms the aluminate ion, text AlO2F. That pH-dependent solubility is key to purifying bauxite ore in the Bayer process.
So here's a final thought for you to chew on. If the stability and the solubility of a common oxide like alumina are so incredibly sensitive to both potential and pH, what does that level of environmental sensitivity imply for how we manage complex industrial waste, or how we design corrosion protection for other crucial metals like copper or iron, whose oxides have their own equally complex electrochemical personalities?
A great question to ponder. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the heart of electrochemistry.
We'll see you next time.